There is no place like it on the planet. Commonly called the Four Corners region, it contains more national parks and monuments than anywhere else in the world. This singular geographic feature is aptly called Red Rocks Country. The Colorado Plateau is large. Larger than the states of New York, Illinois, Georgia, and Virginia combined. But in spite of all this land, virtually no one lives here. Yet, at one time, it was home to one of the greatest ancient civilizations the human species has ever produced. the Anasazi culture. Mark Varian is Director of Research at the Crow Canyon Archaeological Center in the heart of the Anasazi homeland.
These were some of the finest builders that ever lived, and the architecture that's left behind by the ancient Pueblo peoples still stands today throughout the Four Corners region. This includes buildings that are as much as 4 and even 5 stories high, and they were built so well that we can still view them today in places like Mesa Verde National Park.
It is a geologist's paradise. It has domes, hoodoos, natural bridges, dramatic pinnacles beyond belief, mesas, arches, petrified forests, dinosaur footprints, and spectacular canyons of all sizes and shapes. And if that isn't enough, one of the nation's most important rivers, the Colorado River, cuts through its heart like a hot knife through butter. It is also the ancestral home to 3 great Indian nations, the Zuni, Hopi, and Navajo.
My name is Landersan, and my tribe is Navajo, and originally we call ourselves Dene, which means the people. Back then, the Spanish, they label us as Navajos because we used to steal their horse, because in English it means horse thief. Yeah, well, we label us as Dene, which means the people. Land itself, it gives off its beauty, and people do their artifacts, their artwork, their arts and craft. It's pretty much a lot of beauty in the land. Yeah, that's what attracts a lot of the tourists and the people.
This special place for Native people has, hidden deep in its canyons, ancient and mysterious rock art and writings. Rock art and writings telling stories and rituals of long ago. This magical place, containing all these wonders, is the Colorado Plateau.
I think when people come to the Colorado Plateau, they have a sense of ease, they have a sense of peacefulness, and part of this is the lack of humanity that we see on the plateau today. There's very few cities or towns on the Colorado Plateau. It's mostly been avoided by human beings because of the lack of water. And this has, ironically, what repelled people in the historic past is which brings them back here now because of this lack of humanity. And there's a very satisfying feeling about looking through beautiful clear air and seeing these striking colors in these beautiful outcrops of rock. Many people become inspired when they come here, and many artists and poets and writers have found the Colorado Plateau to be the perfect place to come and practice their craft.
The plateau has one special gift for the human soul. Of all its features, none is more profound, more spectacular than the 8th wonder of the world, the Grand Canyon. The Grand Canyon has brought people to their knees in awe, transformative awe.
Grand Canyon river trip and sometimes a Grand Canyon hike affects many people in similar ways. And the ways are normally shocking, like, oh my God, this is big. Or how big is it? I can't even tell. And then once people get sort of a handle on what sort of environment they're in, and that it's a separate world from the rest of the world, it's hemmed in like a lost valley, like a fictional place in some novel. The reality of it, once it starts to creep in, and then the understanding of how much time has passed in the creation of these rocks, many, many formations, usually affects everybody in a similar way, which is, wow, this place is old, this place is big. And many people say it in different ways, but our lives are nothing but the one beat of the wing of a gnat relative to this place. And then the next revelation that most people experience, and this happens a lot, is that, gosh, my life is short. I better do something with it. And frequently people think about, well, what have I been doing, and why was I doing that? I'm going to make some changes. So I'd say that if you had to boil it down, the number one catalytic effect of Grand Canyon on people is a revelation that this is not a dress rehearsal, you got to do it now, whatever it is, and people make changes in their lives.
It is a beauty of light and color. It is a beauty of shapes in space. American author Edward Abbey, who spent a year as a park ranger on the Colorado Plateau, wrote of such features. If they have any significance, it lies, I will venture, in the power of the odd and unexpected to startle the senses and surprise the mind out of their ruts of habit, to compel us into a reawakened awareness of the wonderful, that which is full of wonder. Even though description, photography, and video can inspire, the true beauty of the Colorado Plateau is something one needs to personally experience.
I think the canyon country in general and the Colorado Plateau is so fabulous, so almost otherworldly, that we as Americans are absolutely blessed that we have this sort of scenery in our country. It just amazes me aren't more people who take a look at it. But it's profound enough, in my opinion, that it's almost a sacred experience.
In order to understand why all this beauty is present in this one particular region of the planet, you have to understand the geology of the Colorado Plateau and the forces that have shaped this marvelous landscape. From the air or driving across the Colorado Plateau, even the casual observer discovers that the Colorado Plateau is dry. Dry and hot. In large part, except for the higher mountain peaks, the Colorado Plateau is a desert environment. Indeed, most of the landscape is bare rock, and most of those rocks are red in color. And if you do find water, it's found at the bottom of the canyon as a free-flowing river. Finally, if you take a careful look at the rock, you can see banding. Sometimes subtle, and other times distinctive layer upon layer of different colored rock. This different colored rock suggests that these layers were laid down over time. Laid down in the far distant geological past. Remarkably, unlike most of the rocks in America's West, the rocks of the Colorado Plateau are not tilted or distorted. These rocks remain pretty much as they were when they were deposited over 70 million years ago. Geologist Wayne Ranney has spent years studying the Colorado Plateau and has written the definitive book on its geology.
The United States is divided up into 26 physiographic provinces, of which the Colorado Plateau is one that's centered on the Four Corners area: Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, and Utah. And the distinction of the Colorado Plateau is that it's an area of highly uplifted sedimentary rocks that have been very little deformed when they were uplifted. And that's what separates it from the surrounding provinces of the Rocky Mountains and the Basin Range.
For a long time, the forces behind the remarkable uplift of the plateau remained a mystery.
So the Colorado Plateau has been uplifted thousands and thousands of feet from below sea level, and there's been many theories advanced onto how it could have been uplifted. And what is known is that two plates collided in the geologic past, the Farallon Plate and the North American Plate, and the subduction of the Farallon Plate beneath the edge of North America is essentially what caused the uplift of the Colorado Plateau.
So as this ancient block of sedimentary rock was being pushed up from below, something else was happening. That something was water erosion. Erosions caused by the cutting power of flowing water.
What this uplift did to the Colorado Plateau is it placed it at a position where the elements of weathering and erosion could attack this uplifted plateau. And the large rivers that exist in this area have sliced down into this vast stack of sedimentary rocks and created numerous canyons that are separated by these huge mesas or plateaus that separate the rivers. When one travels on the Colorado Plateau, they're liable to see a lot of rocky pinnacles that are sticking up in the landscape. Monument Valley is a great area to see this, Canyonlands National Park. And a lot of people who are unschooled in geology might think that these giant spires were pushed up out of the ground like a popsicle. But really what they are erosional remnants of once continuous strata that used to sit across the entire landscape. And the plateau has an approximately 3-mile thickness of stratified rock. And as these rivers cut down into the various layers, they cause canyons to form, and as those canyons widen, the rocks become narrower and narrower, and eventually you're left with a small pinnacle as an erosional remnant on the landscape.
But what about all that red? Reds merging into oranges, yellows, maroons, and purples.
I think probably the one thing that attracts people to the Colorado Plateau the most is its color. And when you look out on this fantastic landscape, you'll see various shades of red or orange, even purple or magenta. And the colors in the rock are actually due to very minute amounts of iron oxide that coat the clear sand grains in each deposit. And the various concentrations of iron oxide or the oxidized state of it will give you these various colors.
So how long has this process of uplift and erosion been going on? Most geologists would say the process started around 70 million years ago, a time when the dinosaurs were approaching their last great extinction. An extinction that only birds survived. At first, the uplift of the plateau was swift, geologically speaking. Now most geologists agree that the uplift is complete. An uplift that, when combined with the erosive power of water, has left behind an incredible array of awe-inspiring formations.
I think when you look at the worldwide landscapes on planet Earth, the Colorado Plateau probably has more protected areas than any area on the planet of a similar size. And you think to yourself, how is it that so many areas have been set aside to be protected for all human beings? And it must be because of the geology of this area. The geology is the foundation which has given this landscape and given it the look that it has. And so many foreigners come to the United States to see the Colorado Plateau, and whether they know it or not, they're coming to look at its geologic heritage. That's what is left behind this beautiful landscape called the Colorado Plateau.
A geological heritage that is preserved in the greatest collection of national parks on the planet, each distinct and special in its own way. Not surprisingly, the national parks and monuments are spread evenly throughout the Colorado Plateau. On the west side, there is the Grand Staircase with Bryce Canyon National Park at the top, Grand Canyon National Park at the bottom, and Zion National Park in the middle. On the far eastern side of the plateau, there are the archaeologically significant parks, Chaco Canyon Canyon de Chelly, and of course the jewel of the Anasazi culture, Colorado's Mesa Verde National Park. Also located on the eastern half of the plateau are Arches National Park, Canyonlands National Park, and Capitol Reef National Park, all located in the state of Utah. Further south is Arizona's Petrified Forest National Park. And then there is the expansive Lake Powell, extending from Arizona into Utah. The damming of the Colorado River at Page, Arizona, has created this incredible sea of blue. A sea of blue creating incalculable dendritic or tree-like patterns. Patterns accented by the flaming red rocks of the plateau.
Lake Powell National Recreation Area is a national park preserved area that a lot of people might not think of when they visit the Colorado Plateau, and that's because Glen Canyon Dam has blocked the Colorado River and flooded Glen Canyon in the process. But only about 15% of that national recreation area is covered in reservoir water of Lake Powell, leaving 85% of the territory just as it was before Glen Canyon Dam was built. And the tremendous diversity of landscapes that can be found in this recreation area is staggering. And it's a little known secret on the Colorado Plateau that Lake Powell is just the avenue to get to many of these other places where you can see geology in all of its glory, right in the heart of the Colorado Plateau.
And the best way to see this geology in the middle of this hot, dry desert is, ironically, by boat. Sailing on the cool, crisp waters of Lake Powell.
Glen Canyon Dam is built into the Navajo sandstone, and as a person travels upstream for the first 40 or 50 miles, you get into younger and younger deposits, the Carmel Formation, the Entrada Sandstone, the Morrison Formation. And then about mid-lake, the rocks start to arch up from beneath the lake, and then you see the Navajo Sandstone again, you see the Kayenta Formation, the Wingate Sandstone. You can see Navajo Mountain and the Kaiparowitz Plateau, and there's just a wealth of landform features that can be seen from the waters of Lake Powell as one travels upstream.
Nowhere else is it more clear than on Lake Powell, essentially floating on the Colorado River. Nowhere else is it more clear that the most important force in shaping the Colorado Plateau is the mighty Colorado River.
So beginning high in the Rocky Mountains, we have a lot of snowmelt that coalesces as runoff, and it comes off the western slope of the Rocky Mountains. And this runoff coalesces into two big drainages, the Upper Colorado River in the state of Colorado and the Upper Green River in Wyoming and northern Utah. And these two rivers come down, they collect 70% of all the water that's found in the Colorado River. These rivers come together in Canyonlands National Park, And then the Colorado River goes down through the heart of the Colorado Plateau, goes through Glen Canyon, goes through Grand Canyon, and at the very western end of Grand Canyon, the river leaves the Colorado Plateau and flows out onto a province known as the Basin Range. And then it continues for hundreds of miles down along the lower Colorado River corridor to the Gulf of California. It's one of the most colorful transects that any river on planet Earth makes on its way from its source area down to the sea.
The park closest to where the Colorado River enters the plateau is Arches National Park, gaining national park status in 1971. Arches National Park has perhaps the most densely packed collection of massive and peculiar rock formations on the planet. Immediately upon entering the park, the visitor is greeted by Park Avenue, named after New York's famed concrete canyons. This Park Avenue is an incredible grouping of eroded monoliths, fins, and spires. All seem to magically change in the ever-shifting sunlight. Next, along the road cutting through the park, are formations called the Oregon and the Tower of Babel. Off in the distance are the petrified sand dunes. Continuing on, almost out of nowhere, is balanced rock. Now the visitor is ready for the park's namesake, Arches.
At Arches National Park, you have a number of circumstances that have come together and acted in concert to create the arches. The first thing is that you have a couplet of deposits. Below is the very tight mudstone and claystone of the Carmel Formation. This is overlain by windblown sand of the Entrada Sandstone, which is very porous where water can move through readily. And long before this area was exposed to erosion, these two deposits acted to conduct groundwater along the base of the Entrada Sandstone. And what this did is it weakened the cement between the sand grains in the Entrada, and this caused little pockets of it to become weak. When the area was uplifted, a series of vertical fractures were imparted into the Entrada Sandstone, and weathering along these joints or fractures caused these fins to form. In fact, there's a place in Arches National Park called the Fins. Well, because of this previous weakening of the cement in the sand grains, now they weather out into these holes and they break through these thin fins to create the many arches that you find here in this national park. And there's more arches in this national park than any comparable size landscape on the planet.
What's left is the most famous arch in the world.
Delicate Arch is one of the most visited arches in all of Arches National Park. And it's probably the combination of the hike up this gently sloping ramp that brings you to Delicate Arch, but then when you get there, you come around the corner and you see this fantastic arch that has the La Salle Mountains in the background. And the setting of Delicate Arch is really unmatched in the whole national park. You get this broad view, but then you also have an arch that rises dozens and dozens of feet around the surrounding landscape.
As the sun sets and the moon rises, the park takes on a whole new unworldly character. To the west of Arches are two parks of vast dimensions. Canyonlands, and Capitol Reef National Parks. The westernmost of these, Capitol Reef, is filled with canyons, cliffs, towers, domes, and arches. This long and narrow park was established in 1971 and preserved 378 square miles of land that encompasses the 100-mile-long Water Pocket Fold, a warp in the Earth's crust that is 65 million years old, a warp that began in conjunction with the rising of the Colorado Plateau. Here is an excellent place to take in the Colorado Plateau's desert flora. Stunning barrow cactus, yellow and red prickly pear cactus, and the bush-like cholla cactus. Contemporaries of the Anasazi, the Fremont sculpture petroglyphs, picture writing or rock graphics, are some of the finest in the world. They are found throughout the Colorado Plateau, but here they are especially concentrated along the Fremont River, where it transects the sandstone cliffs of Capitol Reef National Park. Nobody knows for sure what these petroglyphs mean, but Landerson, a Navajo who recreates the art found in his grandmother's cave, has an idea.
This is the artwork that I do. It's just basically done on stones that I find on the cliffs and when I hike on the canyon. These are the antelope. They use the antelope, the antlers for like pecking in the walls to make the ruins and the pictographs and the petroglyphs. And they use the skin for clothing. And this is the hunter. He travels by the stars. You can see the stars with the crosses and the moon phases like the full, half, and there's no moon, the new moon, and the arrow and the bow, and the 4 directions like a compass, the migration symbol, like how they migrated deeper inside the canyon, the moon, the stars, the echo symbol, like how they communicated inside the canyon, and the scorpion, they use the venom to put on the tip of the arrows to make hunting easier in the winter. And this one is painted and carved, it's etched in. Also have a tool for it, a tool that I use. It's basically done with a nail that's flattened and sharpened like an arrowhead.
Sandwiched between Capitol Reef and Arches is Canyonlands National Park. Established in 1964, it is the place where the Colorado River makes its first dramatic impact on the landscape.
Canyonlands, to me, as a geologist, is the heart of the Colorado Plateau. There is no other park that exhibits all the qualities of the Colorado Plateau in one place as much as Canyonlands National Park does. And probably the most important attribute to this park is it's the place where the 2 big rivers come down out of the Rocky Mountains, and they have their confluence right in the heart of the national park. And in the old days, before 1922, this was the junction of the Green River and the Grand River, and only below that confluence at that time is where the Colorado River used to begin.
The alcoves in and around Canyonlands National Park contains some of the most stunning rock art found anywhere in the world. Rare wall paintings, sacred paintings known as the Barrier Canyon style. Who were the mysterious painters of these magnificent rock panels? no one knows for sure. It is said the panels date back to between 2,000 and 4,000 years ago. Some archaeologists even argue that they may be over 7,000 years old. These extraordinary human-like figures are typically painted in monochrome reds and browns, elongated ghostly images. Images with small hands and feet, or anthropomorphs missing them altogether. Amazingly, the bodies of most of the figures are life-sized or larger. They have extraordinarily decorated torsos, using a variety of baffling patterns. Some figures include tiny birds flying about their heads, or tiny people perched on their shoulders. It is hard to dismiss their extraterrestrial-like quality. And one can only imagine what these figures must have meant to the people who created them. The furthest south of the geologic-based parks on the Colorado Plateau is Petrified Forest National Park. It is a park named for its large deposits of petrified wood. Established in 1962, it covers about 146 square miles of semi-desert scrub and also contains many deposits of highly eroded and colorful badlands. Badlands aptly named the Painted Desert. But what amazes the visitor are the giant fossilized logs scattered amongst the desert landscape. Fallen trees that lived in the late Triassic period, about 225 million years ago. Harder than the Chinle Formation's matrix which contains them, these ancient fossilized pines are left behind as the colorful Chinle sediments are washed away by water and wind. The Chinle Formation appears on the surface throughout the Colorado Plateau, where it erodes differentially into badlands. Badlands made up of cliffs, gullies, mesas, buttes, and rounded hills. Here in the park, the multicolored painted desert is an exceptional example of this geologic process.
Petrified Forest is an interesting place on the Colorado Plateau because here is a large concentration of petrified logs that are strewn about the landscape. And the name is a little bit of a misnomer because I've run into a lot of people from back east who had visions of driving their car on a highway where this stone forest of still standing trees was going to be present on the landscape. And when they get there, they see the Chinle Formation, which at very first can be off-putting when you see this very dry and dissected landscape. But as you start to wander around the petrified forest, you see these huge tumbled driftwood logs that were caught up in the shale of the Chinle Formation. And they've been beautifully preserved into gem-quality jasperized logs. And a visit to the petrified forest is really a visit to the Triassic past here on the Colorado Plateau. The trees are basically found of 3 different species, but by far the greatest concentration of trees is in a genus called Araucarioxylon. And these ancient trees from the Triassic period about 225 million years ago are thought to be very close relatives to the Araucaria trees that grow in the Andes Mountains of South America today, and also closely related to the Norfolk pine of Norfolk Island in the South Pacific.
At various locations in the park, the fossil logs can be found still embedded in the sediments.
The logs are found at different horizons within the Chinle Formation. Geologists split each formation into certain members, and it's the petrified forest member and the Shinneramp conglomerate member where most of the trees come from. And you're looking at a thickness of rock that's probably about 200 feet, and at various horizons within this 200-foot thick layer are these trees. And what's interesting about this is that wherever you find one petrified log, you find dozens of them. And this has led geologists to believe that what we're looking at are ancient log jams. When a big volcanic eruption would happen back in the Triassic, it would send out a huge ash cloud which would knock down trees growing along riverbanks, and then these floods would come down and they would coalesce the tree trunks into these great big log jams. And typically wherever we find one petrified log, we find dozens. And then you'll move along that horizon for a mile or two and find not one.
Two such places are the Crystal Forest and the Giant Logs Forest. The eastern half of the plateau also contains the magnificent cliff dwellings of the Anasazi, now referred to as the ancestral Pueblo people. Cliff dwellings readily visible at Mesa Verde National Park. And Canyon de Chelly National Monument.
A lot of visitors to the Colorado Plateau will encounter some national parks whose basis and origin is their archaeological remains. And you can think of Mesa Verde National Park or Canyon de Chelly National Monument. These are places where the Anasazi, or the ancient ones, once built their structures about 1,000 years ago. And when you look at the geology of these two parks, the geology is quite different. Even though both parks contain alcoves, the ages of the rocks and the types of sedimentary rocks that are found in both those parks are quite different. I wonder if the Anasazi knew that when they were building their cliffside homes at Canyon de Chelly, they were building into a deposit of a wind-blown sand dune, much like you would see in the modern Sahara Desert today. I wonder if the Anasazi would know at Mesa Verde National Park if when they were building their homes in these alcoves, they were in the sandstone of a beach that was washing up on the Great Cretaceous Seaway some 75 million years ago.
Yet they did build them. As it is today, this area was a very harsh land, with dramatic changes in temperature and rainfall, and with major climate shifts during the Anasazi's occupation. In short, a volatile high desert climate. As everywhere else in the Americas, the Colorado Plateau was first inhabited by people who subsisted by hunting wild game and gathering fruits, seeds, and roots. Exploiting these resources meant that these hunter-gatherers, as they are called by archaeologists, had to live in small mobile family groups or clans. That changed everywhere on the planet when humans learned that plants and animals could be cultivated and domesticated. This happened in the Americas with the rise of maize cultures. The emergence of the Anasazi as a distinct culture began with this shift from hunter-gatherers to agriculturalists. As the Anasazi settled down to grow corn, and later beans and squash, they started living in pit houses, simple underground structures. At the same time, they became potters, creating the stunning black and white pottery they are known for. At this time, roughly 1,400 years ago, the ancestral Anasazi were scattered across the landscape of the Four Corners region. Then something changed. Steve Nash studies and dates the slow but steady rise of the maize cultures in the desert Southwest.
Something 1,000 years ago, 1,200 years ago, induced these people to come together in closer groupings of people. First small villages and then much larger villages. But there were, again, some serious choices that they had to make about their lifestyles and what it meant to come into those groupings of people, because you have to deal with more people on a daily basis. You have to negotiate with them on a daily basis. You have to solve problems with them in a more cooperative fashion, and so on. So it was deliberate, but it was over a long period of time, and there was probably no one single cause that we can identify that said they should go and live like this.
The living like this was in pueblos, essentially apartment buildings, large multifamily units. In short, it was a transition from pit houses to cliff dwellings. Interestingly, these new dwellings incorporated the old pit houses in a new form, kivas, underground spaces where they held ceremonies and community meetings.
The transition from pit homes to kivas occurs at the same time as does the transition from pit houses to pueblo living. And some have argued that the pit house, a kiva, is a hearkening back to the way things were when people were living in pit houses, because they're very similar structures in many ways. But again, it happens over the course of several hundred years. Translated into human generations, say a human generation is 25 years, a 200-year span is 8 different generations. That's a whole series of great-grandmothers getting back to that person. So you can see that there's the possibility for a lot of change during that time. But as pit houses became less and less common on the landscape, pit house kivas, underground ceremonial rooms, became more and more common. And then the prevalence of kivas around the Southwest differs depending on which area you're in. There are more kivas, for instance, I think in the Mesa Verde region than there are in the Chaco region. So it diversifies across space as well as through time. But in general, as pit houses disappear as dwelling units, they appear as kivas.
The building of the Anasazi pueblos occurred in 3 cycles. Starting in the Mesa Verde area, they built pueblos. Then they moved south, and then back again to Mesa Verde. This was a slow migration process.
They change between living in communities of small single-family farms and then occasionally grouping together into larger villages where many families lived side by side. And that happens in at least 2 and perhaps more cycles during the 600 to 1300 year time period. At least twice people were living in communities of single family farms, and then at the end of an occupational cycle that's about 300 years long, they move into these larger villages. Then that cycle starts over again. They begin with dispersed communities, and towards the end of that cycle they aggregate into larger villages again.
The last 2 migrations produced the golden age or classical period of the Anasazi. First at Chaco Canyon in New Mexico, and then finally in the spectacular cliff alcoves of Mesa Verde in present-day Colorado. During their 700-year presence, the Anasazi built many pueblos across the Four Corners region. Most were not spectacular cliff dwellings like these. In fact, less than 10% were. Some of these pueblos were multi-story structures, with as many as 5 floors. These pueblos were, in fact, great cities. Upwards of 800 rooms have been contained in some individual buildings. Room sizes averaged about 6 by 8 feet. How were they built?
The pueblo buildings are made out of resources that you can find on the landscape. There were no hardware stores in prehistory. You had to extract the resources that you needed from the local landscape or trade for them, and then build with what you had. So the Pueblo buildings are actually remarkable in their architectural styles and substance because they are made so well. One could argue that they're over-engineered, and that's the beauty of it for archaeologists working today, is that these sites were so well engineered that even after 1,000 years, they still exist for us to look at. These folks were using sandstone chunks of various sizes to make walls, in some cases at least 3 feet thick. And they were stone masons, probably who specialized in doing nothing but what we would today call bricklaying. What did they do for their roofing materials? This is where, to me, it gets interesting, because they used trees, and they used trees of different sizes in a perfectly logical arrangement for rectangular rooms. They would get the large beams, the large trees for doing the cross beams, and then they'd use smaller trees for the next layer, and then they would use smaller branches or grasses and then put mud on top. The trick is, where do you get trees in the American Southwest? You can drive around through Monument Valley, through Mesa Verde land, through Chaco Canyon land, through southeastern Utah, and trees aren't all that common. You find them in the mountains. The people that were living in Chaco Canyon about 1,000 years ago, just over 1,000 years ago, were making gigantic structures. And one of these structures, Chetro has got 250,000 trees in it. Where'd they get them? They got them from at least 50 miles away at the Chusca Mountains. And we know this from looking at the chemical composition of the tree rings in the wooden beams that are still found there, because the chemical composition matches the chemical composition of the trees in the Chusca Mountains. How were they getting those trees from 50 miles away? They didn't have draft animals, so they didn't have horse-drawn carts. They didn't have the wheel. They carried those things or floated them down a river. But it's a huge labor investment that we're talking about. And many times today, people will think about these folks were eking out a living and scratching out resources from the landscape. These folks had free time, and they had the ability to focus, to concentrate resources. Somebody was inducing probably young men to spend a great portion of their adulthood doing nothing but transporting beams from 50 miles away.
The last pueblos the Anasazi built were the most magnificent. The Mesa Verde cliff dwellings are the best preserved of these buildings. Around 1300 AD, the Anasazi suddenly abandoned their grand pueblos in the Four Corners region, never to return. They spread south into the Rio Grande River basin in New Mexico and Arizona, and became the modern-day Pueblo, Zuni, and Hopi tribes. However, it is the west side of the plateau that contains the 3 most famous and most visited parks: the Grand Canyon, Zion, and Bryce Canyon. Each represents steps in what is called the Grand Staircase. Each park takes you further back in geologic time. Indeed, the bottom layer of the Grand Canyon is the ancient core of planet Earth. There is nothing more magical than a sunrise at Bryce Canyon, as the morning rays creep over the canyon's famous hoodoos.
These layers that make these colorful hoodoos at Bryce Canyon were deposited in a freshwater lake only about 40 million years ago. And much of the modern landscape was coming into existence when the rocks at Bryce Canyon were laid down. A lot of people really like these colorful hoodoos at Bryce because you're very intimate with them when you go there. The park is not large, it's easy to get close to all of the features at Bryce, and sometimes you get this reflected light back onto the hoodoos, and it makes them almost come alive for people when they visit there.
So how did these hoodoos come to be? At the time these ancient lakes existed, this area of the Colorado Plateau was a giant basin, and although water could flow in, there were no rivers to carry the water out. Instead, sediment forming at the bottom of the lakes just kept building up. Kevin Poe, affectionately called the singing geologist, gives talks at Bryce. He compares the sediment to the residue in a bottle containing an instant orange drink. Tang.
Sediment, yes, of course, okay. So here we are on the top of Dutton's Grand Staircase, which he called the Pink Cliffs, which is, I mean, you know, was the guy colorblind? I mean, come on, this is orange, right? Well, it wasn't that he was colorblind, it's just that Dutton never really got very close, as it turns out. When you look at this same layer of rock, clear out on the horizon there's the Powell Point, named for Dutton's boss, John Wesley Powell, and you'll see when you have to look through all that atmosphere disturbance, the rock does kind of turn pink. But when you're sitting right on top of it, it's orange, because of course that was the ingredient, iron, in this lake system, right? And you know, and it wasn't tang, it was limestone, but limestone, like sugar, does completely dissolve in water up until the saturation point. And so with this lake, more and more limestone being added, kind of like the tang addict, eventually you start to get the sediment forming at the bottom. And instead of orange 47 or whatever the heck this artificial color is, it was the iron that mixed in there to give it that beautiful color. Now the rest of the story is that the Colorado Plateau finally begins to rise. When it rises so that what was a lake basin before gets turned wrong side out. You know, it gets lifted up high, so now the lake drains, and all that ooze left behind could lithify to become the rock and the limestone that is Bryce Canyon. And as I kind of look through your faces here in the audience today, I can see that pretty much none of you really care about that. And that's okay, because they make me say all that stuff at the beginning about how the rock forms, but come on, I know what's really going on. The reason why you paid $25 to get in here is not to know about how the rock formed, but to celebrate how the rock is being destroyed, right? That's what makes us special. Because first of all, we're not even a real canyon. What do you got to have to be a real canyon? Yeah, you got to have a river running through it. And even in a torrential downpour, you know, just water falling from the sky, buckets and buckets, we get a little tiny creek at the bottom. But as soon as the rain stops, well, the creek soaks into the ground, and that's it, okay? What you see out there is carved by water, but it's not flowing water, it's the freezing and thawing of water, frost wedging. So imagine that rock out there with all the different cracks in it. You could take my hand here and pretend it's one of these fins, one of these walls that sticks out, and of course it has cracks like the gaps between my fingers. And now you put some snow on top of it. And so let's say that it's like January, okay? And because even though it's really cold at night, for several hours during the afternoon, it's above freezing. So that snow melts, and as water, it trickles down inside the cracks. And then later at night, when it freezes, what happens? It expands, good. As water turns to ice, it expands. But it also does something else. It does, because think about it this way. When water boils, it also expands. But when water freezes, it expands and gets hard. Who said that? I heard it somewhere. Hard, yeah, exactly right. My old mean geology professor used to give us a 0 on the entire exam if you didn't remember get hard. And then what he would say is, decrease your density and get harder. Think about that for a minute, right? There's only one substance in the universe that can do that, and that's water. And that was the point he was trying to make. A spectacular process to, you know, expand and yet get harder. And so as water does this, it starts forcing apart holes in the rock. Eventually that hole becomes so large it can no longer support its weight, and the roof caves in, and the delicate sticky up things on either side, that's a hoodoo. That's how they form. And those hundreds upon thousands of them you see out there were different parts of cracks and holes in rocks and now stand by themselves. So one last song about the ultimate fate of my beloved Bryce Canyon in the loose tradition of Peter, Paul, and Mary. Where will all the hoodoos go? Long time weathering. Where will all the hoodoos go? 3 million years from now. Where will all the hoodoos go? East Sevier River will tear them down. Now you have learned. Now you have learned about the Bryce Rocks. My name is Ranger Poe, and thanks for coming out and rocking today.
The middle step in the Grand Staircase is Zion National Park. A park that encompasses some of the most scenic canyon country in the United States. It is characterized by high plateaus, a maze of narrow, deep sandstone canyons, and striking rock towers and mesas.
A lot of people who visit the Colorado Plateau think of Zion as being their favorite national park. And probably one of the reasons for that is because of all the great canyons that we have as national parks here on the Colorado Plateau. Zion is the only one where you stand next to the road at the bottom of the canyon and you look up to the rims on either side. Most of our national parks is where you look from the top and you look down at a very tiny river. But in Zion National Park, you can actually be in the heart of the canyon and you can see these fantastic walls of Navajo sandstone rising up both sides of your vehicle.
You know, when you're down there at Zion, you see the beautiful towering white cliffs. One of the things you'll notice right away is the rocks don't have, they're weird. Instead of having nice flat lines in all that sedimentary rock the way sedimentary rock is supposed to be, what they have are these bizarre angles, right? You'll see a bunch of 15-degree angles stacked on top of each other for a while, and then maybe above those some 30-degree angles for a while, and then some 15s and then some 30s, going all the way up the top of these huge towering cliffs. If you can find the right place, the intersection where you see those 15s meeting a 30 like this should remind you of something, because Mother Nature only ever makes one thing with this shape in cross-section, and your big hint is it's made of sand. So what are we talking about here? What is this? Sand dune, exactly right, yeah. And because the physics of a sand dune is pretty simple. Basically, it's all about how hard it is to blow sand uphill, okay? You know, if you don't believe me, try it. Right? That's what science is all about. The best you'll ever do is maybe about 15 degrees blowing those little grains uphill. And if we were to, there's not a lot of wind, but let's say the wind's coming this way towards us, okay? So then the shape of the sand dune would be something like this, because the little grains, they'd go uphill, but once they get over the top of the slip face, once they're protected from the wind, then they can stick to each other up to about 30 degrees. And that's how you get that shape of a sand dune. Whether it's a sand dune in the Sahara Desert today, or a sand dune in a gigantic desert that was centered on this region about 200 million years ago. So here we've got the land now as a desert. Great big ocean of sand centered on the Utah region here. And what you can see is that, you know, the whole Utah's covered, it's spreading out in different areas, and it's not that the wind blew continually the same direction over and over again. So they're not individual dunes that are gigantic tall, but they're dunes stacked on top of dunes. So, you know, if you were to imagine, maybe for a few million years, the prevailing wind comes from the south, so you'd have a bunch of dunes that have this orientation. But then if the winds then come from the north, well, they'd flatten those off underneath and build new sand dunes that go this way, and then maybe, you know, over here from the east, and then over here from the west, all the way up, stacking sand dunes on top of sand dunes, until eventually it all lithifies. You know, it turns to rock. And that's how you get the sandstone, the white cliffs.
But Zion is more than geology. It's a place where the visitor can experience a desert riparian ecosystem of plants and animals. As the sun pours golden light onto the white walls of Zion Canyon, the plateau lizards scurry frantically about over sandy trails, soaking up the heat of a desert day. Or cautiously searching for food in and amongst the rocks. Mule deer graze near the edge of the road, looking for lush foliage. Perhaps a California condor soars off in the distance. And there are wildflowers. Wherever you find them, the wildflowers of Zion National Park give you the feeling you've discovered a secret treasure, an extra splash of color in the dry red rock desert. A red rock desert that contains one of the wonders of the world, the last step of the Grand Staircase. There is something about the Grand Canyon that is beyond words. It's transcendental. It will introduce you to a part of yourself that you didn't know existed. Michael Guillieri has written numerous books on Grand Canyon and knows its power intimately, its power over people.
Fortunately, there's the movie, The Bucket List. It's a cute little movie, but it's now become sort of a major cultural touchstone for the people that I take down the river. And not everybody, of course, but in general, in the world, there are a lot of experiences all of us would like to somehow experience. You know, most of us would like to be in a gondola in Venice at some point. You know, most of us would like to at least stare at Kilimanjaro, if not climb the thing. And one of those bucket list items is Grand Canyon, or the Southwest in general, the Canyon country. And I think now what beckons people that didn't used to is actually, gee, you're missing out if you don't see it. I think prior to, for the last 100 years before that movie, The Bucket List, came out, I think people were entranced because the descriptions of other people, almost word of mouth and an occasional movie or documentary, there must be something pretty amazing out there, we should go check it out. And more of a personal interest in seeing America's most beautiful and elaborate scenery. Since then, I think that's still operating, but in addition to it, there's this idea that, well, before you die, you got to check all this stuff off a list, and Grand Canyon's on that list.
How did this magical wonder of the world come to be?
Well, Grand Canyon is arguably the most famous hole in the ground on the planet, and some people in South Africa like the kimberlite diamond mine better, but in general, the world expects everything measured against the Grand Canyon. It's a yardstick. It's 1,000 cubic miles of missing rock, and that's just the hole we can see now. Previously, it was probably about 3,000 cubic miles of rock back about 10, 15 million years ago. It's a big hole in the ground created by the uplift of the Colorado Plateau, and the river holding, different rivers ran through as far back as 70 million years ago during the last of the dinosaurs. There was a river that flowed from west to east along the same route, more or less, but opposite direction. That was the beginning of this carving of Grand Canyon. It's almost down to some 1/100th of a millimeter a year. But it's all based on the uplift of the Colorado Plateau, which has almost ceased. So what we have, from our perspective, is kind of a finished product.
A finished product that is so spectacular because the Colorado uplift here was the most extreme. And the bedrock has forced the river to create a narrow rather than a broad canyon. Michael Guillieri has an analogy that explains this phenomenon.
I like to use the example that the Colorado Plateau was the wedding cake. The groom held the knife. The groom got weak. He stuck the knife in the vise, lifted the cape up through the knife. And that's the carving process. It just happens that the geology, the actual rocks in the area of Marble Canyon and Grand Canyon are tough stuff. This kaibab we're currently on is the top rock all the way across the plateau, north, south, east, west, kaibab limestone. It's really tough stuff. So it allowed the canyon to be narrow and sheer, as opposed to just eroding away like a slope.
There are a number of great journeys of discovery that are part of American history. DeSoto's trek through the South, Coronado's exploration of the Southwest, Daniel Boone crossing the Appalachian Mountains, Lewis and Clark's epic voyage to the Pacific. By the end of the American Civil War, only one journey of discovery in America remained: the Grand Canyon. And the man who was going to conquer it was John Wesley Powell.
Grand Canyon was the last plum to be plucked in the basket of, or on the tree of great explorations. And John Wesley Powell, after his, probably had an epiphany moment during the Civil War when he laid in a tent with his arms sawed off, decided he was going to do something, or maybe lots of somethings that were groundbreaking, important, whatever. He was sort of a narcissistic specimen, but he managed to put together an expedition partly funded by his own money, donations, a little bit of federal money, and gathered up a bunch of mountain men, bought 4 very unsuitable boats, beautiful boats that went fast, but boats that wouldn't turn a corner, called Whitehall haulers, and headed down the river. And strangely to me, because I've gone through all the original journals written by everybody and original letters, to retranscribe them into something you could read. He didn't write much, a couple of thousand words in an entire 99-day trip, but he did cover that ground. There are probably 3 or 4 people who had done it before him, but all inadvertently or on a raft or whatever. But that expedition became well publicized in Scribner's magazine and an 1875 government report. It fired up the imagination of the nation because it was a hair-raising trip, and 3 men didn't even survive it. So it became a bit like Lewis and Clark's expedition, with the exception that Lewis and Clark didn't lose anybody and Powell did. It also opened up to the world the idea of fantastic chasms that were beyond the ability to imagine, because his flowery prose in describing what he experienced, what he saw, was apparently equal to the task. Very few people have described as well as he has the grandeur of the place.
A grandeur that anyone can still experience. Experience even by boat, as John Wesley Powell did. There are many ways to enjoy the Colorado Plateau and its many national parks and monuments. For most of the millions of visitors who come here every year from across the world, just viewing the spectacular scenery and landscapes is good enough. Each park has ample trails and walkways that take the young and old to marvelous overlooks. In most parks, there are plentiful trails for hikers. For the more adventurous, there's kayaking, or rafting the Colorado River and its numerous tributaries. However, whether traveling the Colorado Plateau by helicopter, boat, or by car, each new twist and turn brings a new visual delight.